to make sure, most of you kind of arrived after I announced, please make sure that you sign in the sign-in sheet. And then that way we can prove to the city that we are paying for lunch for people other than ourselves. We have a pretty full presentation today, so I'm going to hurry up and get out of your way. So you want finger guns now? Is that your signal? Okay, there you go. So my name is Shantae Rogers. I'm an administrative analyst for the City of Grand Rapids. This is the Grand Rapids by Design series, Lunch and Learn series. It is hopefully to introduce you group of folks that includes project managers, developers, architects, engineers, and builders to some of the new concepts and projects that we are doing in the city. We like to partner with outside entities, so if you guys have any suggestions for topics for future Lunch and Learns, I am open to them. Today, I'm going to do a very short introduction of our speakers because as you can see, there is quite a list of people that will be speaking today. So most of you have attended our Lunch and Learns before, so you're familiar with Alison. She can just wave her hand over there. She is our sustainability coordinator, and I'm pretty sure there's more words behind her name than I just said, but that is the gist of it. We also have Lou Canfield, who is the development center manager. We have Jed Soper, who is kind of new to the organization. He is an electrical inspector with the city. Yes, electrical. Okay. I always get electrical and mechanical confused, but electrical inspector. And then we have Bill Hordyke, who will also be speaking, who is a plans examiner. Some of you who are familiar with bringing things to the counter knows that he answers a lot of questions. And then we will have time for a couple of questions in theory at the end of this session. So if you have grabbed a lunch already, please open your chips and start crunching now. We are streaming live today on Facebook. It's a new fancy technology we're trying out today. We'll see how that works. All of our previous Lunch and Learns are on our YouTube website, and in theory, this one will be there later. If not, I will let you know how to find it afterwards. And without any further ado, I'd like to bring Alison up. I think she's kicking off this presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. Glad you're here today. Can I stand over here? Anywhere up here. Okay. I don't want to interfere with the other one. I want to be able to see everybody behind the column. So I'm Alison Sutter, and Shantae, thank you for the introduction. I have two roles at the city. I oversee and manage our sustainability programs, and then a new office that was created just a little less than a year ago, which is around performance management for the entire city and helping to implement a strategic plan that our city commission adopted that I'll speak to. Is another role that I have. So thanks for being here. As you can see by the number of folks that we're going to have participate in our presentation today, getting and trying to make solar installations easier in the city of Grand Rapids is something that has very much been a collaborative approach across a number of different players, and the Office of Sustainability being one of those. And I'm super grateful to the team that is here today and other staff that have been helping drive this project and move some things, and we're excited to share some of those updates with you. So I know some of you have been here before, but how many folks are architects or designers? Okay. How many are in the construction renovation fields for businesses? Okay. Any business owners or operators? Okay. Well, that's good to know. I appreciate that. All right. Well, I'm going to, as per usual, I think we can take questions toward the end. We'll get through the material first, and then we'll take some questions as a team at the end if you have anything. So keep a hold of those, but please do feel free to continue enjoying your lunch while we go through the presentation. So here, as a part of the agenda, just going to do a quick overview of how this work aligns to the city's strategic plan and why it's an area of importance for our city. I'm going to talk a little bit about the SolSmart program and introduce what that program is. That was really kind of the impetus for us starting and coming back to look at what we're doing as a city around solar. And then some of the other team members are really going to talk about some of the changes that have taken place within our zoning ordinance and how our development center is working to streamline the process and make it easier, and just talk about what it is and the actions that take place to install solar. So as I mentioned, the City of Grand Rapids, the City Commission approved a citywide strategic plan in April of last year. It's a 4-year plan that provides guidance on all of the operation for the City of Grand Rapids. And we do have it published in both English and Spanish, and this is something that City Manager Mark Washington, who's been here a little over a year, when he came to his new position with the City of Grand Rapids, he really wanted to see some alignment for our work, and so that was when we got started on this project to create it, and I want to talk about how solar aligns within that plan. But big picture, the plan we agreed and identified as the City of Grand Rapids 6 core values, and they're listed here, but sustainability is one of those core values, and we are working as staff to ensure that we are making decisions by using the lens of these 6 values for all of the different projects and policies and programs that we have across the City of Grand Rapids. You can see collaboration is one as well, and so we're putting that into practice across our different departments and trying to work together better with respect to solar and how those in the community that are interested in installing solar can. We also have 6 different priority areas, which are on the bottom right of the screen, and that's how we organize the work that we do across the City of Grand Rapids. And so for purposes of today, one of those 6 kind of broad buckets that we use is called health and environment. And you can see our objective statement says the health of all people in the environment are advocated for, protected, and enhanced. So that's what we are working toward as staff. And the first objective under this particular priority is to reduce carbon emissions and to increase climate resiliency. And that's specific both to our own city operations as well as how can we support that work throughout the community. So the strategy that is circled on the screen today really speaks to how can we as a city create programs and policies that allow the community to reduce carbon emissions, whether it's from buildings or transportation in our own homes. And oftentimes, if you're not as familiar with talking about carbon, the best way to reduce carbon is often to reduce your energy consumption. So how much electricity are you consuming in your building? How much natural gas are you consuming in your building? Or fuel for your fleet or for your vehicles. And so this is one of the areas where we identified to do some work to help expand and make it easier for those in our community that are interested in installing solar as a form of renewable energy to have that opportunity more easily available. So now transitioning to talk about SolSmart program. This is a national program offered across the United States that is led by the Solar Foundation and the ICMA, which is an organization, kind of an industry group for city and county governments to work together. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Energy and really through their technical offices in terms of providing some technical support to cities that want to participate. So it was for free for us to participate in, which was really excellent, and we were really able to leverage some outside expertise to help us along this process. And so the SolSmart program uses a number of different criteria to evaluate how solar friendly are you as a city of Grand Rapids, how solar friendly are you, and how can we look and evaluate opportunities to reduce barriers for those that are interested in installing solar. And through the program, which we'll walk through at a high level, then the organization will designate a city as either bronze, silver, or gold in terms of how solar friendly are you. And we, as I mentioned, we did have the ability to leverage some national technical expertise to help us in some of these areas. And so this is updated through January, and there are over 360 communities across the United States that have been designated. You can see the breakdown for those that have been achieving gold, silver, or bronze, and you can of course see in the line graph that this is something that has been growing over years. A lot of that has to do with how the cost of solar has been coming down and how more businesses, individuals, homeowners, neighborhoods have started to understand the importance of being able to generate your own energy within your own facility and to increase the amount of renewables in your own property. This is a map of the United States and where those communities are. You'll see that there are 3 in the state of Michigan, Grand Rapids being indicated on this map. Ypsilanti was actually the first city in the state of Michigan. They received gold designation, and then very recently the city of it's either Lansing or East Lansing. I think it's Lansing that also received certification recently. So what does this mean? I'm not going to go into all of these details, and the slides will be made available to you, but at a very high level, to achieve bronze, you have to sign a statement of participation in the program. Our zoning administrator, which I saw our acting planning director stepped in, Kristen Turkelson, signed off on a review. So outside experts conducted a review of our zoning ordinance, and I'm going to review some of the results, and we acknowledged receipt of that review. We also had a permitting checklist, and that was something that we went back and reevaluated, and the team did an excellent job. And I will note that actually our national partner said that we had one of the best permitting checklists and solar guides available on our website for the community. So that's a kudos to our team for the great work that they've been doing and getting that information out. And then you have to earn a certain number of points that increase as you go from bronze to silver to gold. So silver, you also have to go in and state that solar panels and PV, photovoltaic, is allowed by right in all major zones, and that was something that we confirmed that we did have within our zoning ordinance. And then also training all of your inspection staff on the best practices around permitting and inspecting for solar. And this is something that I really want to acknowledge Mark Fleet and his entire staff, some of whom are here today, just to say they really jumped on board and said, absolutely, we're in and we're willing to sit down and train the entire inspections department and work on and sit in on a webinar and a training to make sure that all of our inspection staff have all of that information with respect to solar. So really appreciate their partnership there. And then for gold, you have to commit to having a 3 business day turnaround for your small rooftop solar, which is something that is in line with our best practices that we work on here. And then we're going to talk about in terms of, but really zeroing in on the zoning ordinance and ensuring that, that there are minimal to almost no obstacles for solar installations within your city. And they identify a few examples of obstacles that are in place in some cities in zoning ordinances. And so we're going to talk about ours a little bit, but you also have to achieve 100 points when they go through and evaluate your city and how you're doing with respect to solar. So what I had mentioned as a part of it, and we worked with the National League of Cities, which is a very reputable national nonprofit organization that really supports cities. They came in and they actually looked at our entire zoning ordinance and came back and kind of provided this review to us to identify. And in that review, they identified some potential barriers in terms of, in our, and you'll hear we've amended our zoning ordinance, but at that time, solar energy systems were not allowed on the street-facing side of a building. And so that was identified as a large obstacle for solar installation within our community. And then we also had a restriction where the solar panels could not extend more than 18 inches above the height of a structure. And so the team will talk about how that has been changed. But those were kind of the 2 key areas that were identified when the review was done. They also identified some gaps in terms of making some suggestions around providing a definition of solar energy systems. And you can see they kind of provided that information around a high priority, medium priority, or a low priority in terms of helping to inform the city and our partnership around some other opportunities that we have to continue to make it easier for solar installation in our community. I do also want to note, though, that there were a number of items when they go through and review a zoning ordinance that are often identified as obstacles in communities that were not obstacles in the city of Grand Rapids. And that really speaks to our planning department's work historically in terms of being forward-thinking and even addressing solar and allowing it by right in a number of instances. So with that, I think for now, I'm actually going to turn it over to Brent, it looks like, who's going to come up and walk through from our planning department some of the work that they've done to help streamline this.
All right. Thank you, Alison. So my name is Brent Geurink. I'm a planner here with the City of Grand Rapids. I do reviews on permits that would come in, including solar permits for compliance with the zoning ordinance. And I'm going to briefly walk through some of the solar energy requirements that we have in our ordinance, as well as highlight a few of those changes that were alluded to with a recent text amendment to the zoning ordinance. So first, a little background. The zoning ordinance is updated and rewritten to kind of follow and implement those themes, plans, policies, goals that are adopted through the city's master plan. The city's master plan establishes the type, character, and density of development, and the plan's themes and recommendations are a result of pretty extensive public outreach, engagement, and input. So that's a little bit of a background of how the city's master plan then is implemented through the zoning ordinance, as well as some other officially adopted plans within the city. Within that framework, staff worked, kind of started with this SolSmart process and review on a text amendment to the zoning ordinance. We didn't have a lengthy public engagement discussion process. We are coming into redoing the master plan here in the next year, so I'm not exactly sure on the exact timing. But that will provide an opportunity for additional changes when we're talking about future changes that might more significantly affect the character and form standards that we have here at the city. But we work to address some of those key hurdles that were discussed from the SolSmart review. As was discussed, the street-facing side, previously it required an administrative departure, which is a separate application and additional review if it was to be on a street-facing side, and that would look at different scenarios, whether it's the way the house faces or the roof faces, potential barriers that may be on site with trees or that kind of context. So it was allowed if it was approved, if we had an approved administrative departure. So that is one thing that we looked at, was changing that from the administrative departure process for street-facing side, as well as amending then the height of solar equipment above, a structure. Previously it was 18 inches. Let's see here. So looks like some of this was dropped off the slide, but I'm going to walk through some of the sections of the amendment ordinance. Solar energy systems is an accessory use. It's permitted in all zone districts in the city. Oops, there we go. This is a little bit about its placement. So it is allowed to be a ground-mounted equipment. It does follow the same requirements as you would see for a deck or patio. So in the side or rear yard, at least 5 feet from the side or rear property line, and that kind of setback. Nothing was changed in that portion of the ordinance. For placement on with rooftop equipment, this is allowed to be installed on a main or accessory structure, including garages, other structures on the site. Subject to these four kind of review standards here. So the panels do not extend more than 2 feet above the height of the structure which is placed. And so it's a little bit higher than it was previously. As you had mentioned, not projecting beyond the eaves of the roof. Panels are not allowed to be located on the street-facing side of the structure, except where the street-facing side has southern exposure. So this was something that was previously implemented by staff, like I had mentioned before, with an approved administrative departure. This streamlined that process and clarified it. For those street-facing sides that do not have southern exposure, we still have the administrative departure process that can be followed, but we clarified that for the southern exposure because anytime that those kind of applications were coming in, we were kind of going forward with that anyway. So we're just helping to clarify that and streamline that process. And then the panels are integrated to the extent possible with the architectural character of the building. As I mentioned, the administrative departure, it does have additional considerations to follow. So we still do have a little bit of a hurdle there when it comes to street-facing sides that are not on the southern exposure. It kind of, if you look at the orientation of different roofs, houses, buildings, we don't typically have many applications that are coming in for street-facing that isn't southern exposure anyway, but it is still a potential, and we have that administrative departure. As I had mentioned, with the master plan process coming up, there is an opportunity there. I know sustainability is a major goal policy, as kind of mentioned there by Allison previously. It's a great opportunity for us to be looking at this more comprehensively, if for any other changes that may be coming up at that time. All right, I think that's the end of the section on the zoning ordinance. Bill?
So again, my name is Bill Hordyke. I'm with the building department, plans reviewer with the building department there. And just a quick touch base on what's required for the permitting through the building department. A building permit and electrical permit are still required for the installation of the solar panels. And there's a great resource that the development center team, Lou kind of headed up with that, put together solar guide, solar power guide. It's available. It's either online. We've got a couple copies here. I think you all had one on your seat there, and it's very, very clear on kind of what we're looking at when we look at the panel application of that. And I've told many people that our job in the review side is basically to look at what you're proposing and make sure that when the inspectors show up in the field to look at what's done, everything's going to be approved, easily approved based on what we saw at the counter that's coming in. So when submitting for the building permit, it's a pretty simple application, and the attachments we're looking for that are basically a site plan, especially if it's going to be ground mounted, showing where it is going to be on the site. And if it's on a roof, we're looking for a roof plan showing where the panels are going to be on the roof structure there. And there's specific information about what we're looking for in the document there, and it gets kind of technical. I've got a nice packet if anyone here wants to look at it of an example packet of what's submitted there, but we're looking for aisleways or access ways on the roof. We do need access ways on the roof for firefighting operations to make sure that that's not completely covered if they have to fight a fire there. Or if it's on a flat roof, there may be equipment mounted on the roof that needs access ways to get to the equipment to maintain the equipment. So we have to make sure that those are maintained outside of the solar panels. And then structural concerns on it. If it's a commercial job, we're looking for a structural report on the roof by a licensed engineer that's telling us that, yep, the roof is capable of supporting the additional weight that we're putting out with these solar panels. On a residential job, we're looking for the manufacturer's installation guidelines. Those are going to show most of the manufacturers have a recommendation of a prescriptive approach of if we put it on this type of roof, we're going to be okay. But with that prescriptive approach, we need a little bit of information of what is the existing roof like. Oh, is it on trusses? It is on joists? What size are the joists? What's the span of the joists? Just that site-specific information for us to look at and say, yep, this is going to be capable of holding it up. Also with that is how many layers of shingles are on there. If you've got an old roof that's got multiple layers of shingles, the additional weight of the solar panels might conflict with that unless the structure is enough to support that. But we can look at that, bring that information to us with the application, and we can look at that at that time to make sure that everything's going to be approvable before we kind of give you that go ahead and go out and get it done permit for that. And Jed's going to speak a little bit more specifically on the electrical permit and what's required for that. Next slide.
Hi there, I'm Jed Soper, electrical inspector with the City of Grand Rapids, here to talk about some of the common things that we see on the electrical side of things regarding solar. So this is a very complex topic that we talk about when we talk about solar installations and how we connect them to the electrical service on a house. I'm going to just go over some of the basics for common themes that come up as we do solar inspections. So the first thing to talk about is wiring methods that are allowed. And there are two things that happen with solar. Solar is produced DC power. We have to have a method of converting that over to AC power. So because of those two methods, we have different ways that we approach them. The DC side of things has to be in conduit the entire way. That portion from where the solar panels produce the power to where they get to an inverter point is the DC, and those have to be protected at different levels than the regular. When we get back to the AC power, we're allowed to use our normal Chapter 3 wiring methods. So most wiring methods that are allowed in a house are still allowed for solar once they get converted over to that AC portion. So a disconnecting means is the next thing that we're looking for. There has to be a readily means to disconnect the power from where it feeds the house. That is very common. Rapid shutdown is the next thing on the list. For our firefighters, they have to be able to come up to a house. They need to immediately be able to say, this is where the rapid shutdown for the solar is. This is what we're going to turn it off, and there needs to be a nice big sticker on there that says, this rapid shutdown switch is either turning off the power leaving the array, or it's turning off both the power being made by the array and leaving the array. There's two different methods, and it has to be very clear for the firefighters so that they know, hey, we're going to climb up on this roof. We can either bust through these panels with very minimal effort or very minimal risk of getting shocked, or we're not going to bust through these panels because there's a really good chance they're still producing electricity. So it's just an important labeling for the rapid shutdown that we have to have. So there's two different kinds of arrays that we're commonly seeing. One is a self-contained module system, which is they're all tied together, and by the time the wires leave the solar array, it's already on AC power. So you can use typical Chapter 3 wiring methods. It makes it a bit more flexible of an installation for the electrical side of things. The other one is where you have a separate inverter. So the solar array, it's all tied together, producing DC power, leaves in DC. Typically on the side of a house, then you would see another separate box, which the DC power goes into, converts it over to AC power, and from there ties into our system. So as far as connecting to our services, we have existing services on each residence or commercial property. We have to look at the capacity of what those services are capable of. If it's a 100 amp service, we have to know, based on how we're tying in, if that 100 amp service is going to be capable of handling the extra load that the solar array system is supplying and putting in there. And how we connect that to our services, there's a couple of different methods. One starts out on the line side, so you have your breaker panel typically on a house or a disconnect on the outside of a house. You can either tie in ahead of that, so between the meter socket and your first means of disconnect, that would be what's considered a line side connection. Otherwise, if you're on the load side of that, so you got your meter socket, goes to your first means of disconnect, and from there on would be the load side. If you connect into that, there are several requirements that we have to meet on how that ties in, but typically that would be tying on to a breaker in the breaker panel, and that power is back feeding, so opposite direction of what normal electricity would flow. And there are very specific requirements on how we have to do that. So then grounding and bonding is another very important aspect of solar. So the solar frame itself has to be bonded into the electrical system. If there's any fault on that metal frame, we need to make sure that it gets to where it's going so that it can trip that overload or overcurrent protection and shut it off so that the metal does not stay energized. But there are also specific requirements that are required based on what was previously mentioned on the line side versus load side connection to the electrical service on how that grounding and bonding happens. And each one of those has their own specific requirements. And then lastly, labeling and identification. There are lots of labeling and identification that are required when it comes to solar installations. We have an entire chapter in our code book that talks about solar itself, but then there's another chapter that talks about how we tie into our services. And so it's highly recommended that a licensed professional would do the installation for solar. Our code says that it has to be installed by qualified personnel or qualified persons. And that's in there for a reason, because it's taking a very complex thing, tying it in. You've got multiple power supplies now. You've got solar supplying power into a grid. You've got grid power coming from the power company, and they have to interact well together. Has to stay safe and minimize fire is the ultimate goal. So when going for that interview process, if you're going to hire an electrical contractor, I highly recommend that you ask them questions about their qualifications, what solar installations that they have worked on previously, and just make sure that they have a very well-rounded understanding of solar installations before moving forward. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Lou Canfield. I manage the Development Center from an admin and customer service point of view. And sometimes we'll get the question, how much is really happening in Grand Rapids in terms of solar installs? And you can see there's been a dramatic increase in the last couple of years. In fact, the 2019 number, I understand, is not yet updated for the fourth quarter. So 2019 should significantly exceed 2018. So there are a significant number of solar installs per year in Grand Rapids, and we expect that only to continue, which is part of the reason why the city has gone through this SolSmart process, and why we're trying to make this as easy as possible from a customer service point of view. So Bill mentioned that we invested quite a bit of time in this guide. You're seeing a photo of the paper form, which I'm also holding. But it's also available in terms of all the text online. So you see the exact same information in the web guide as you see here. We want to make this as easy as possible from a customer service point of view. So we recognize that, people's goal isn't to obtain a building permit. That's not why they're coming to see us. They're not here to obtain an electrical permit. What they're here for in this case is to, with as much clarity as possible and as quickly and painlessly as possible, get their permits so that they can install this particular solar system. So with that in mind, the guide covers multiple permit types. So of course, building and electrical. For PV systems, we also recognize there are still some hot water type systems being installed. So the guide encompasses those as well. And we're providing information on things like if you're in a historic district, you still need historic approval for a solar install. As Brent mentioned a few minutes ago, if it's a street-facing exposure that's not south-facing, there's this additional administrative departure requirement. So all that is explained in here. What sort of attachments are needed to come in with the applications to ensure that they're readily approvable. And all of the applications can be submitted online, including the attachments. So trying to make that as painless as possible, and by removing barriers to solar installs, by making things clear and convenient and quick, we're hoping that helps to incentivize people to do more of this. So thank you for being here today, and I think Allison has a few closing remarks, then we'll take some questions.
All right, thank you, Lou. So I think this might be my last slide before wrapping up. So where did we all end after all of this? We ended up getting the silver designation, and we're very, very close to receiving the gold designation, and really the only thing at this point that is kind of lingering for us in terms of a gold designation is currently that, as was discussed, we do require this additional step around an administrative departure if you want to install solar on the street-facing side of your building when it is not southern-facing. But this is something that our team has committed, as was mentioned, the upcoming master plan process, which will be something that will probably start in the next year to do in terms of looking at and more broadly collecting feedback and engagement from the community around what it is you want from your community from a planning perspective. This will be an additional item where we can collect some more feedback from people and get some response and engagement. And my hope is that this will be something that we can then revise at that time to remove this kind of last barrier as was identified by our external partners, so that time then we would be able to go back and reapply and achieve the gold designation. We do have enough points, and we've met all of the other requirements and prerequisites for purposes of the gold level designation. So with that, there was my point where we received our silver certification. So really, just in closing, a couple things that I wanted to wrap up and share. And I should have started with this. A lot of times you get this question of like, does solar really work in Grand Rapids? I mean, it's cloudy here a lot. Yes, it does. We've had we as the city have also been doing assessments on our own facilities with respect to opportunities to install solar, and are also looking at our Butterworth landfill for purposes of installing solar. We do have one small solar array installed at our Oak Industrial facility that is around 120 kilowatt system, and so yes, it is. We monitor it, we can track it. There's a link available online that will show you how much energy it generates, because that's something that's tracked and is available publicly. With respect to the cost of solar panels has come down pretty dramatically in the last 5 years, and the experts in the field that I've seen speak at a number of events talk about that they anticipate that those costs will continue to decline. If you think about, or maybe if you're familiar, Consumers Energy has made commitments to really growing the amount of solar that they are putting up across the state of Michigan, and that will be using to kind of supply all of the electricity that we get, and they wouldn't be doing that if it doesn't make business sense from a financial perspective. So those are often some questions that we get asked. But I do also want to highlight, through the city, we have passed PACE, which is a policy that provides some financing assistance via private loans that you can apply for if you want to install solar. Now that's specific to commercial properties, so that does not apply to a single family home. But if you do have a commercial property and you are interested, I'd be happy to provide more information on PACE. It's also on the Office of Sustainability's website. And there are some others, such as Michigan Saves, where they can help provide some of the upfront capital if it's something that you're interested in installing solar. We're trying to help provide resources and programs for those that might be interested in solar as well. And then really just in terms of where will we go from here, the master plan process was mentioned, but through my office I'm continuing to explore and look at what some other cities have done kind of above and beyond even in the zoning ordinance. And there are some programs where they kind of call it solarize, that maybe you get enough interest from your community that says, yes, we really want to install solar. And then through this program we could kind of help aggregate the buying power and help facilitate, so that perhaps we're just aligning with one contractor and one solar developer, and can further streamline that process for those that are interested. And that's out there for maybe a year or two in the future, but those are the type of things that are on my radar to continue to look at, to hopefully make it even easier for those of you that might be interested in installing solar. So I think I'm going to wrap up, but I should have asked in the beginning, does anybody have solar on their building? Oh, excellent. And is anybody looking in the near future to potentially put solar on a building? Okay, well, excellent. All right, well, we will be here, and I'll be sure and can share my business card with anybody, and we'll make these resources available. Just want to take another moment to really thank our entire planning team, as well as the development center and our inspections team. They've been huge partners on this, and I know that we'll continue to work together. And if anybody has questions, you can reach out to any of us, and we would be happy to help. Yes, so there's time for questions now. So yes. Sorry.
Could you let me in on your logic stream of why, if a roof is not facing south and it's going street side like west, because that was the only area or the additional area that needed to gain energy from, why is that a variance of causing another permit or hearing or costing more money?
So I think there's one way I'll answer, and then I'll repeat the question. Yes, thank you for reminding me. So I think there's a question to clarify why currently after our amendment is there still kind of this extra step if you want to install solar and it's street facing but it's not south. So let's say it's west or it's east or it's different. So I think it's kind of two-pronged. One is in terms of our existing process was that you had to get an administrative departure regardless of which way your roof was facing. And we said, And the practice at our development center was really to approve those when it's south-facing, because the southern-facing exposure of your roof is the best scenario to generate electricity. And so that was something that was happening kind of administratively through the departure process. And so we and the planning team was comfortable making that change in our zoning ordinance to allow that just by right without having to go through the administrative departure. But we want to have more broader engagement to allow a discussion about solar and installing solar more holistically, regardless of what side of your facility it's located on, kind of as a part of the broader engagement.
It shouldn't really matter because it's a problem for the customer that he has to go east or west. He can do it, but he has to do it.
Mm-hmm.
He shouldn't be canceled.
Well, I appreciate your comments and your sentiment, so thank you for sharing. And yeah, no, that's great. We're glad to have it here. But most of the time it is southern facing, but there could be some instances where it might be.
The cityscape is a special challenge.
Mm-hmm.
The trees, other buildings,
Mm-hmm.
everything else, and Heritage Hill restriction.
Mm-hmm.
So anywhere realistically and making sense-wise should be allowed. You know, as long as it has some aesthetic, you know, it complies with some aesthetics in the neighborhood and that kind of thing, you know, and kind of eliminate that as a
I appreciate your feedback. Thank you. Other? Go ahead. So the question was, is it possible to install solar panels on medical or recreational cannabis facilities in businesses? And the answer is yes. There's no prohibition around that. It's actually in a separate area that I partnered with the planning department for those that may not know. So we're still working through the process of the approval process, and I see our expert is here in the audience in terms of when it will go live for license applications for medical or recreational marijuana facilities in the city. But there's no barrier or restriction around the installation of solar, and it's actually something that I would highly support because the facilities are extremely energy intensive, and so that's one way to help offset that. Yeah. Another question? Was there one other hand? Yeah.
All right. Okay, you can hear me? Regarding your comment on the structural permitting. Okay, so as a solar installer, I've been pretty much mandated to get a structural engineering report from a licensed structural engineer for basically all the solar projects we do. Now, I did hear that that's not always necessary, but my experience has been it is necessary.
So that is one of the things when we went through with the training seminars that we've been through for the solar installation. On a commercial project, it is required. It's still required for all commercial projects. In residential, most of the panel manufacturers have prescriptive installation guidelines of where their panel, of what their assembly is, and where it's appropriate on different types of roofs. So in those instances, say I'm given a house with a common rafter or a common truss plan or truss assembly, I should say, with only one layer of shingles existing on the roof, and the manufacturer's guidelines showing how that they're supposed to mount on that type of assembly, I can accept that as, yep, manufacturer says if I install like this, it's going to be okay. I know the current conditions, one layer of shingles, trussed roof. We're going to be able to approve that and walk and move forward with that. That may not have been the case prior to our training, but after our training, we've kind of gotten to that point of saying, okay, I accept that. Now, if it's a situation, a lot of buildings in Grand Rapids were built prior to trusses. And so we might have roof rafters. Well, what size are the roof rafters? Are they 2x8s, 2x6s, 2x4s? Having that information will help us make the determination of, is this adequate as is, and per the manufacturer's installation guidelines, or is it something where we might need some more information, maybe a field visit or documentation of how that is going to be accommodated?
Yeah, that's cool. That makes me very happy. So, you know, we can take some pictures then, bring you some examples, and because in those old homes,
Yep.
we have no plans, and you know,
That's true, yep.
You had mentioned, you know, what the roof's made of. Maybe if it was a replaced roof, but if we can get some pictures and sizing.
And that would be suitable field investigation of showing us what is the existing conditions, and we can say, yep, that's going to be suitable for your
Which
installation.
happens when you do a site evaluation
Yep.
anyway. So,
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, well, I think with that, we'd just really like to thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. If you have any additional questions, I'll be happy to stick around, as I'm sure our other colleagues will. And I think Shanti's going to close us down.
Yep. So all of the information that was presented today in theory will be available online. You guys know how I love my theories. We'll either email out the presentations for so you can actually read through all of the technical information that was sent today. The brochures that you guys have on your chairs, you're welcome to take those. They're also available online. So in the email that you'll get after this Lunch and Learn, we'll include the link to the brochure online. So then that way you can share it and have it digitally. And we will have copies available upstairs. Our next Lunch and Learn is February 14th, I think. Don't quote me on that. I had the date before I was trying to remember all of the other information to tell you guys. Yeah, it might. Is that a Tuesday?
No.
Okay, then just kidding. It is the second Tuesday in February. You'll get another announcement today. And again, if you didn't get a chance to sign in the sign-in sheet, would you please do so? So then that way we have verification of who was here today. And thank you guys for coming. That's it.